Alarm Media.
Food labels carry useful information to help you make more informed choices about what you and your family eat and drink. Most packaged foods are required to have a label with this information, but the information required depends on the food type. To tell us more about the food labels and understanding them is Melvi Todd, a doctoral student at the Stellenbosch University Food Science Department. Good morning, Melvi, and thank you for joining me.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
All right, that's awesome. Many of us are already familiar with food labels, and I know there are some people who aren't familiar with them or who don't understand them. So, first of all, what is a food label and why is it important?
Well, I think typically when we think about food labels, you look at the information that are on packaged goods. And I think that's an important first point to note is that obviously if you're buying products, fresh products in informal markets, they might not have labels on them. But when we're talking about packaged goods, typically bought in a retail environment, the food label is everything on that package which tells you more about the food. What are the ingredients? How much does the product weigh? Are there allergens in there that you need to be aware of? If the product's making a nutrient content claim, something like saying it's high in fiber, then there is a requirement that it has a nutritional table. And that will then give you the breakdown of the protein, the energy, the carbohydrates, how much is sugar, etc. But what a lot of people don't realize is actually according to our current legislation, that nutrients table will only be there if you are making the claim. So in fact, at the moment, the minimum requirement is only that there's the ingredient list and the allergens highlighted. And then, as I mentioned, the quantity, and then you've got things like your best before dates, etc. And the idea behind this, of course, is to help consumers making more informed decisions about what it is that they're eating and drinking.
Oh, all right, that's awesome. Earlier on, I ran out to go and grab something, and I went to go and grab my pack of oats, my box of oats, so that we can better understand food labels. Because I know most of us, when we're buying food, we don't read everything. We sometimes just pay attention to a few information or few points that are provided, or sometimes we just look at the nutritional facts, the nutritional values or elements that are available on here, and we pick according to this year. So how can we simply understand the information on a food label, and especially when it comes to calculations? I mean, here it says per 100 grams or per 40 grams of serving, and how do we understand those? How do we determine the 40 grams servings? Sometimes we don't even measure or weigh what we eat, we just eat.
And I think therein lies the problem, and that's what our research really looked at, is we looked at what are the barriers to people using food labels, and specifically would something like health claims help consumers making more informed choices. And one of the big outcomes, or there's several barriers that listed by in our research, and some of the challenges experienced is, first of all, it's really small. So you just showed me that carton over there. Some of that writing is up to like 1 millimeters at minimum. So some people require glasses. Some people, even with glasses, might not able to read it. So, we first actually need to talk about, before we even get to understanding, is, can we read it? Is it legible? And is it in a language that we prefer? And so these are some of the practical barriers that we in our research highlight. Now, assuming that you're able to overcome all of those practical barriers, so you can read it, it's in a language, or you can more or less translate it. Now it's a question of, do you actually have the nutritional knowledge to do, sort of interpretation for yourself? How many kilojoules do you need per day? How many is that product providing on the serving size? And that is a big challenge at the moment, because the reality is that for a large part, you almost need a food science degree or a nutrition degree to try and translate what that label means for you. And then, of course, we all have different requirements as humans. We have different levels of activity. We may have different underlying diseases, which will impact, how much sugar we're allowed to eat or not. So it really is quite a challenge for the average consumer out there to try and decipher that information. And I think that's also another outcome of our research, is really that we need to look at ways to make that information easier for consumers to read, especially, you think about the average person on their shopping trip. you're in a rush, you're putting things in a trolley, you grab for what you know, or you go grab what's on special. Nobody really wants to spend half an hour in the supermarket like decoding labels. And that's really where we see this movement globally towards front of pack labels, which the idea behind that, of course, is trying to make the label into something, or put a label on the front that gives a consumer a quick glimpse on whether this is really something that they should be eating more of or less of. And what we've seen in the past is different products putting health claims on, so trying to allude to the fact that, oh, you know, this product's got high in fiber, so it's good for you, you can eat more of it. Or what we're seeing now, even in coming from South American countries, is the tendency to start putting warning labels on products. So warning consumers if there's high quantities of saturated fats, warning consumers if there's high quantities of sugar, which of course we know there's increasing evidence mounting in terms of those nutrients, and which are particularly high in ultra processed foods, and the link between that and a diet high in processed foods that contain lots of fats, or of the bad fats, if they're so-called saturated fats, high in sugars, and that there's an increasing link in the development of non-communicable diseases. And of course, your non-communicable diseases are things like diabetes, cardiovascular heart disease, things that aren't transferred between people, but are developed over time as a result of a number of different things, but amongst others, your diet and your lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was speaking about the warnings and the ingredients. Well, I'm looking at this carton, and it has here allergens,
Yes.
and this is produced in a place that contains a tree nuts. So obviously that information would be important to someone who might be allergic to nuts. But like you mentioned, also it's quite small. Who has time to read something that is so small? We want something that is out here in the front that we can easily see and not have to reach for it on the shelf and look and turn around and, you know, trying to find information about a product. So how do we maneuver that, you know, what can we do about it, and how do we challenge, you know, our governments and the departments to improve on those?
Well, I definitely say this is a matter of research at the moment. Not only myself, but I know there's other researchers also working on this. But I think the trick is that we find a solution that works for South Africa. I mean, we're a very diverse population. We've got 11 official languages. We come from different cultural backgrounds where food means different things to us. We have different levels of access to food depending on socioeconomic circumstances. So I think it's not just a question of taking what's being used elsewhere in the world and like slapping that on a label for us. What we've seen to a large extent is, you know, there have been, especially some of the multinationals, putting on what we call the GDAs, or guideline dietary amounts, and trying to illustrate to consumers, you know, this product contains a certain percentage of sugar on average, you know, that's a certain percentage of your daily requirements. But again, it requires that a consumer has a much more in-depth understanding of food and nutrition than, quite frankly, the average person out there does have. So I think the key will be to do research that's in South Africa, across our population, and so that we get an understanding of what do South African consumers respond to, keeping in mind all of the challenges that we've just spoken to. But I think there's another important aspect here, and that's that it's not just a question of labeling. Getting people to make healthier choices is not just a question of labeling. It's also a question of what are the foods that are available to them in their immediate environment where they're purchasing this food, and how do we also ensure that that food environment becomes more positive and stocked with more healthy foods. And I think that also speaks to, depending on where you're on informal retail or informal retail, what are the products that are going on the shelves that retailers are choosing to put on the shelves? What are the products that they are choosing to put on promotion? Because let's face it, I mean, most of us, I guess, do buy on price. There's the amount of time that we actually can choose one or another. Yes, there's some products that people feel strongly about certain brands, but again, the socioeconomic condition which state in which we find ourselves, and South Africa as a whole, means that a large portion of us are just ultimately choosing on price. How much does this cost? How many tummies can I feed with this? And so thinking that the choice of food is as simple as just choosing what's most healthy for me. That's not a reality. So I think this is where our ambassadors change come in. And I definitely see, if we're talking about achieving change on scale, this is where I think government can partner with retailers and food manufacturers, and even, our healthcare workers. We need a consolidated effort to say, well, what is our aim here? Our aim is to make sure that we get South Africans healthier, because over half of the population in South Africa dies every year from non-communicable diseases, which means that, if they had to change the diet and lifestyle, we would dramatically reduce that number. But the reality is, a lot of our South Africans are dying from non-communicable diseases. With populations getting unhealthier, people are unable to work. They could be absent from work. Their lifespan shortened, their interactions and quality of life with their family is shortened. So I think we need to come to a point where we're actually saying it's not a us versus them. It's not big food versus, healthcare that's carrying the burden. We have to say, it's in everyone's best interest that we get the population healthier. And how do we do that? How do we attack that problem from multiple angles, of which food labels is one angle, most definitely, but it's not a silver bullet that's going to solve all of our problems in one go.
Mm-hmm. Right, Melvi, we're going to take a quick break, but please stay with us and we'll continue thereafter.
Sure.
Open on 235 Matthews Maiwa Road in Durban. Head on over for the Taste with Kick. We offer something scrumptious for everyone in the family. Wraps, chicken tikka, burgers, tender grills, mocktails, milkshakes, and so much more. Corporate and events catering available. Visit our social media pages for more info or call 031 209 0119. Kiki's, the Taste with Kick.
Famine, conflict, and severe economic decline make the humanitarian crisis in Yemen the worst in the world. More than 20 million Yemenis do not know where their next meal is coming from, and over 10 million are suffering extreme levels of hunger. With your support, the Al Imdad Foundation delivers essential food aid to starving Yemeni communities. It's a question of survival. So let's do what's right. Donate online at alimdad.com. or call 0861 786 243 for more information.
For a long time, we've lived in a centralized world where institutions held the all-important data and confirmed all transactions. Those times are over. Welcome to Libertas Group, a blockchain development company boasting an ecosystem that continually redefines the way we do business. Our blockchain is decentralized, making it immune to hacking or alteration, putting the power back in your hands with no middleman, so you can focus on the growth of your business. Libertas, the simplest investment choice you'll make.
Shimmer, sparkle, captivate. Nothing less than a masterpiece. Droplets of gold inspires precious design. Platinum bursts with intricate freshness. And every pure diamond becomes more than just a girl's best friend. Voda Gold Gem Jewelers, where timeless dreams become a reality. Come to us. We tailor-make designer gold, platinum, and diamond jewelry. Trade in or remodel your old gold. Clad yourself with classy name-branded watches. We offer insurance valuation and freezer card calculation. Visit us at 534 Ridge Road, Overport, or call 031 208 9142. Voda Gold Gem Jewelers, manufacturers of fine gold and diamond jewelry.
Listen to something fresh. Listen to Salam Media.
Welcome back. You're listening to the Mid-Morning Talk on Salam Media with me, Mari Mukonda, and today we are talking about food labels or understanding food labels with Melvi Todd, and who is a doctoral student at the Stellenbosch University's Food Science Department. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below, and you can ask away about food labels, anything that you would like to know. Melvi, thank you for staying with us. I'd like to know about foods that are imported. Everything that you've mentioned earlier about being able to read the label, being able to understand it. Now, many times foods that are imported, we don't understand. We just look at them; they look cool. Everybody else as well, where we buy foods that are imported.
Sorry, I lost you there for a second, but I heard the question is really about what to do about food that's imported. So the reality is that according to our legislation, all food that's imported needs to meet the requirements as per our food legislation, which is R146. So they are actually subject to all the same legislation in terms of size, in terms of the language, in terms of what type of information is on there. If they're making a claim, they need to have that nutritional table, ingredients list needs to be present. But this is now, again, a challenge of, depending on which channel those foods come from, because I know for a fact as well, I see products in the well, not necessarily the supermarkets, but perhaps some smaller outlets that don't actually meet the nutritional or the guidelines according to our legislation. So I think my next port of call would be to go and look online, see if you can trace that information via a website or something like that. But I think this also brings me to a point, in terms of thinking to the future and how we can improve food labels. We are seeing increasing smartphone penetration globally, and certainly even in South Africa, it's on increase. Yes, definitely not everybody has a smartphone yet. But if we think about the prior challenges in terms of the size or the language of the label and so on, if there was some sort of QR code or something to scan and that label could be read to you in a language of your choice, or it could take you to a website where, you could have more detailed information, I certainly think that could also help consumers. But the reality is, yes, labeling, I think as it stands at the moment in South Africa, definitely could do with some improvement to make it more user-friendly for our population.
And earlier on, you mentioned about affordability. Not everyone is the same, and not everyone can afford certain things. And I've noticed that retail stores always have a priced to go section. Things that are almost at their sell-by date, or the expiry date is coming up soon, or sometimes with others it's already expired and they still sell it. So what is are those products good enough to consume? Products that are past their sell-by date or almost expiring?
So it's a bit of a technical point, but we don't really talk about expiry dates on food anymore. That's kind of like old terminology, whatever. So we would typically talk about a best before date and then a use by and sell by date. So if we think about fresh produce, something like meat, you usually have a sell-by date, which is the last day that the retailers are allowed to sell that product to you. And then it usually has a few days of shelf life left. And then you would have your use-by date, which is absolutely the last date which you're supposed to use that, after which it's not recommended that you use it anymore. Those would typically be on your fresh products, like I mentioned, something like meat. If we looked at products like something like a can of tuna or whatever, that would have a best before date, and that would definitely say, it's probably still safe after that point in time, but it's no longer at its best, as the name implies. So you'd have products that could be subject to, a little bit of oxidation later down the line, whatever the case may be. The flavor might reduce, those sort of things, but it doesn't become unsafe. So the ones that you really want to pay attention to as a consumer is those ones that have a use-by date, and then you definitely don't want to be using it beyond that use-by date, because that date, the retailer that you bought it from is no longer guaranteeing that it is okay to eat after that point in time.
So basically the retailer is saying to you, well, you can buy it, but make sure that you use it by this day, because if you don't, yes, that's on you, not on us, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. All right. What other information is worth noting?
On food labels?
Yes.
Yeah, I think based on what we spoke about earlier, unfortunately, the global trend that we see in terms of increasing non-communicable diseases, particularly in South Africa, also we have quite a significant increase in the number of people suffering from diabetes. And I think, and again, I'm not a dietitian or anything. My background is food science, more on the technical food production side. and manufacturing side. But I think what I would like to tell people to think of doing is when they look at the food labels, look at the sugar and compare the product that you usually buy with, you know, other ones that are on the shelf, and think about, just take one nutrient at a time, and see if you can't challenge yourself to make healthier choices. Because I think, you know, perhaps it's not so commonly known, but, you know, people think diabetes, oh, it just means I need to restrict my sugar. And in that instance, you know, diabetes has really terrible long-term consequences in terms of your eyesight, destruction of your veins and your arteries and this sort of thing. And it really significantly reduces the quality of your life later on. So, you know, and it's just this thing about making sacrifices now for better long-term health. But it's definitely some small things that we can do to ensure better health later on. So again, I would just say, look at the sugar, look at the saturated fats, consider salt as well. Not everybody's equally sensitive to salt, but these are things that there is research out there pointing to the fact that these are not things that we should be consuming in excess. So have a look at the labels, compare the figures, and, you know, choose the ones where you can that perhaps have the slightly lower numbers, especially on those ingredients or nutrients.
All right. Well, I certainly got a better understanding on food labels. So thank you so much for your time, Melvi. And I hope our audience have also gotten some information. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much. You too.
Right. Todd, a doctoral student at the Stellenbosch University's Food Science Department, taking us through understanding food labels. And food labels is beyond the nutritional values that are available on the packet. It's beyond the name of the product and what you see on the front of the packaging or on the sides. There's a host of information that is available, and well, you have to understand what you are putting in your body. And well, if you have kids as well, you have to understand what you are giving your kids to put in their body. You know, these days we have labels on that will say no added MSG or gluten-free or sugar-free or this and that. And, you know, sometimes when it comes to food that claim to have free of this, yeah, there's always an added something else in order to replace that free from ingredient that they didn't have or that they decided to omit. But that will be a topic for another day, especially when it comes to sugars, because I watched it's called The Sugar Movie. Crazy and scary stuff, that scary information that was shared there. So if you watch The Sugar Movie as well, let's talk next time, inshallah. It is 11:29. Please stay with us. We will be right back.